Okay, so there's something that has been a kind of a trend in academics over the last like decade or so, probably longer actually, where academics have to constantly defend the value of the work that they do. And I mean defend it in the sense of the pragmatics for students on, whether or not they'll be able to find a job with the major that they have, whether or not they're getting the training they need in order to find a job, to make a living, to advance in the workplace, yada, 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 right? Um, and it's honestly frustrating. I don't know many academics who enjoy doing this. It seems more like a necessary part of the job to ensure the survival of the department by getting enough students to, major in that particular academic field or to, secure funding from donors or from administrators of universities to convince them to throw money to that department. Um, and I had to play along with a lot of this. When anytime there's like a major fair, where students are going around and asking different departments about the different majors, I had a whole spiel that I would have ready for students. Right, it would go something along these lines. Right, philosophy teaches you the basic reading, writing, and critical thinking skills that you need to be successful at any job, and it trains you really well, probably better than any other field. Um, the evidence is in reports of earnings that students tend to make with that particular degree, maybe 10 years, 15 years after college. I could also point to how philosophy majors tend to score some of the highest scores on standardized tests for professional and graduate schools, particularly the LSAT, which a lot of philosophy majors are planning on doing as going to law school, so they need to take the LSAT, or the GREs. This is for people going to graduate school or for um, I think they accept it for business schools now, the GRE exam, right? So I have all these things that I could point to as pragmatic reasons to, major in philosophy, to convince students that it's something worthwhile, that they're not going to be a miserable failure and be living in their parents' basement playing video games for the rest of their life, or end up teaching at some mediocre, school somewhere that has nothing to do with philosophy, and they don't ever make use of anything they learn in philosophy classes, right? Like, I'm trying to ease a lot of these anxieties that people tend to have, even if they might be interested in philosophy in terms of the topics that we discuss, right? So there's a lot of this selling of the major, and this is primarily because it feels like education has become some kind of a commodity. Like, we need to, people are looking to get a return on their investment, right? We use a lot of these economic terms, and that has creeped into the educational sector. And so you're not going to pay for college, especially given how expensive college is nowadays. You don't want to pay for college unless you're going to get something monetarily out of it, a return on your investment. So they want to make sure that whatever they major in will help them get a job, get their money's worth, get something in return, right? Um, and this is actually, from my experience, not something that most of these instructors actually want to do, right? Most instructors just want students to be genuinely interested in whatever it is that philosophy explores, right? And for students to value philosophy for its own sake, not as some instrumental benefit to their career. Plus, I personally feel dirty. This is just the personal side. I feel dirty trying to spew out these data points on philosophy majors of success and all this stuff. Like, the truth is that the discipline attracts deep thinkers. So I imagine, there's a lot of self-selecting going on. So more correlation maybe rather than actual causation. It's not as if, philosophy necessarily produces the most intelligent people. I think a lot of people who are quite intelligent, who love, challenges, who love to think deeply, are just naturally kind of drawn to philosophy as a field. It is true that philosophy does train you well. I mean, one of the core classes we teach in philosophy is critical thinking and logic, right? And these two are fundamental for any sort of evaluating of arguments or analyzing of data, right? Um, but I'm not going to try to sell you on philosophy as an instrumental value, right? I want to do something different. Rather, I want to explain how the deeper, more abstract questions in philosophy are genuinely relevant to the way you view the world, and the way that you approach real life decisions, right? If you thought that philosophy just contemplates stuff that you will never actually use, that it's just an exercise in abstract thinking for the sake of abstract thinking, I want to argue that kind of perspective of philosophy is actually a mistake. So one of my goals in this series is to attempt to sway the general public in understanding that there's a deep importance of in engaging with these philosophical questions, that it is not a mere abstract exercise, that it has real implications for the way that you navigate your day-to-day life, the way that you view the world, view relationships, the way that you view your role in society, the way that you just view truth, reality, right? These all are shaped by fundamental philosophical questions that, I'll be honest with you, I'm assuming that most people have some sort of position. It's just that they haven't necessarily grappled with it directly. And I think philosophy is one of those spaces where you're kind of forced into grappling with the deeper questions, um, whether you might have wanted to or not. Sometimes it could be very difficult and personally challenging. But there's also actually a secondary reason that I'm starting this series on explaining why philosophy matters. And the reason is that it has to do with learning, right? Uh, People don't actually learn anything well unless they see the relevance in what they're learning. I mean, there's plenty of research in this area about what motivates people, what, when we feel drained while we're learning. Like one of the reasons we might feel disconnected from the stuff that we're learning is that we don't see its relevance, right? It's hard to get excited or to be invested in learning something if you can't see that it has some relevance to you. And by relevance, I'm not talking about pragmatic relevance. I'm not talking about like how it'll help me with my job. I mean, that's one way to see there's relevance in what you're learning. But no, what I mean is something much more deeply personal for you, right? Like relevance to the things that you already value. Not instrumentally, but inherently, right? Uh, does this stuff that I'm learning matter to me, given my own life experience, given the things that I care about, given the things that, really are important to me, right? Does the subject matter connect to something in my personal life, right? Which, I mean, this makes perfect sense, right? Why care to learn something if you don't see any reason for learning it, right? So, one of the things that I do want to point out in this series are the many ways, and again, it's going to be different for each person because each person has a different set of stuff that they really care about, right? What they really value. But one of the things that I'm hoping to get out of it is to give students is these, ways of connecting what seems to be very disconnected, abstract ideas and thoughts to something that actually might matter more to the students than they might have initially thought. So the secondary reason is for this series is to provide specifically my students and specifically in all my introductory courses to give them a way of connecting with the material in a much more personal way, in a way that directly addresses some of the concerns, some of the decisions, some of the topics that matter in their day-to-day life. The hope is to show that through philosophical inquiries, that we are, in the background, there's so much that is actually shaping the way that we make sense of the world and the way we engage with others and the way we make decisions. And as we make these connections a little bit clear, then I hope that students find a much more meaningful, something much more meaningful in what it is that they're actually studying, right? Whether it's like some of these old thinkers that you might think are from generations ago who don't understand what's going on today, or right, like all the random stuff that we tend to throw out there as reading requirements for a philosophy course. I hope that students can make those connections in part in the hopes that they actually end up being more motivated to learn, but also as a result learn much more effectively and produce much better results, both in terms of outcomes of whatever testing method there is, but also just in terms of what they carry with them moving forward. So for my students who are having difficulty with philosophy, with the readings, who are feeling disconnected from it, this might be a good place to start. Let's consider the exactly how the bigger questions that we are trying to answer in these courses, how it's connected to something a bit more personal to you. And you'll find that the material becomes much easier to digest, much easier to understand, and that you'll find yourself a lot less disinterested when you understand these connections. And in that respect, I hope that you gain something truly valuable from my introduction, my selling of why philosophy matters.